My name is David Rago, and I'm going to be talking about critical reflection, transformative learning, and vision statements. So I did want to cover several points, one being that at the end of this, that we'll be able to see how coursework can be designed to engage students in transformative learning while aligning educator preparation programs with their university's vision statements. And in order to get to that point, I'll be defining some terms and providing some context for everything that's going to precede that final objective. So my purpose for putting this together and to focus on this particular topic is more a personal interest I have in transformation and in transformative learning. And it's always interesting for me to see how things change, why they change, and how people change ideas and why they change ideas and thoughts. So that kind of led me in this direction and looking at perceptions of higher ed in society, how it's changed, and then particular vision statements. So it gets very specific, and we'll just take a sampling of statements, look at it, and look at how they've integrated the idea of change and transformative learning into their statements. So the first part of this is to just to provide some background and some context for everything else to follow. And part of that background is to look at the frequency of use of words like transformation, transformative, transformational, transformative learning, and where in time those words, those ideas became popular or became more frequently used in publication. And so although this graph doesn't particularly show what caused some of these um, increases in use, we can kind of look at where frequency spiked and suddenly increased and possibly think about what was going on at that time that might have influenced that sudden rise in those words and those ideas. This one specifically shows transformative learning, and we can see that it's right around the early part of the 20th, 21st century, the 2000s and the 20th century. So right around that time, suddenly transformative learning came into use, widely used in publications. It suddenly started to appear in literature more often than it had been. No, what's listed here is just a sampling of some vision statements from institutions in the state. And I put them here because I just wanted to highlight how ideas like transformative learning and change and transformation are being used to influence institutions' directions and priorities. Some statements specifically mention transformation, others just mention change or suggest change. And so we get a sense that with the increase in frequency of terms like transformative learning, institutions and public discourse is starting to have that infused within their directions and their focus and their priorities. I included this just to align with that other objective for this presentation, and it shows the attitude of society's perception of higher education over the years from 2010 to 2025. And what we notice is a clear decline in people's feeling about it being important and an increase in people's feeling about it either fairly important or not too important. So that's happening at the same time we see words like transformative learning increase in use, increase in its frequency in public discourse, and an increase in its appearance in different vision statements. Okay, so now that we have that part of it uh, understood or kind of in our heads, I did want to mention the definitions. Okay, we have these words, and what do they mean? And are they being used in the same way with the same ideas and same meanings? So these are textbooks or dictionary definitions, straightforward, um, very similar. They just mention change, to mark change in form, nature, or appearance. So we're talking more about their physicality, appearance, objects, and how they change. Um, Transformative is causing a marked change in someone or something. So there's the idea that it could be an idea that changes in addition to some kind of physical form. Other definitions that are out there from research are these are a sampling. We have one from Mesero back from the early 90s, another one from the early 2000s that you can see it's a little bit more holistic in its meaning. And then the last one is by Barker, um, just a few years ago. I think what's interesting about these is they all share a similarity in that they're talking about change, perspective, change. Uh, the second one by O'Sullivan talks about looking at emotional change, uh, cognitive change, and it's going beyond just the idea that we have something over here and it's going to change in its presence and its appearance and its form. Because now we're talking about behavior. And O'Sullivan kind of touches on that with his, I think. He's saying that other humans and with the natural world are understanding relations of power and interlocking structures of class, race, and gender, our body awarenesses, our visions of alternative approaches to living, and our sense of possibilities for social justice and peace and personal joy. So he's talking about all that being a shift involves our understanding of ourselves and our self locations. So it's about looking at ourself. It's about understanding where we fit in, who we are, and then how that could change. So it's more of a critical look at who we are and what our role is and what our relevancy is and our position is in terms of different contexts. So that's an interesting one. And then it goes on, you can see later on with Barker talking about recognizes changes in the learner's perspective and not just the acquisition of facts. So this was very specific to education. Okay, so we have some of that background and context established. So how does that fit into a practical use? Well, it makes sense. It'll make sense, and it'll make sense in the way that we can see how it can be. Those ideas can be practical in education and with our students. If we know that the a big piece of transformative learning involves critical reflection. And sometimes it appears as critical self-reflection, but especially with um, Mesereau, he talked a lot about critical reflection and his emphasis on that in terms of the transformative learning process. So it's important to understand what that is and what that means. And Brookfield does a nice job of laying out the process in three phases. And I think it's something we're all familiar with, but we just never really put a structure around it or put any real intentionality behind it. And what he says is that in order for anyone to experience some kind of transformation, or for us to move learners towards some sort of transformative learning, our learners, students first have to identify what assumptions they have initially if they're going into some kind of situation. And in educator preparation program, sometimes that situation is an internship, it's student teaching, it's a residency program, and they're in the classroom and they're working with students in real time. So that's an experience for them. And his thought is, in his first phase, is having them identify what assumptions they have before starting an experience like that. Before somebody walks into the classroom and starts working with students, what is their basic assumption about what it's going to be and what they're going to experience? And then after they're able to identify that, then it's going through that experience, it's living through that context, and then it's assessing what they experienced in comparison to what their basic assumption was in the beginning. Did the experience meet their assumption or did it not meet? Was there a disconnect between one and the other? So after that happens, the last phase then is transforming these assumptions to influence future experiences. So what that is saying is, okay, my basic initial assumption going into this experience did not meet what I got out of the experience. And I see that my assumption was wrong in terms of what I thought I was going to experience and what I thought everything was going to be. So how do I reconcile that? And so the reconciliation is that new shift. It's that transformative learning to a different point, to a different assumption. So that the next time I go into the classroom and I experience that context again, I will have a new assumption about what's going to happen. And what's going to happen may still not meet. It's a new day, it's a new experience, it's a new context in terms of students' behavior, student learning. And so I have to re-examine and reassess my assumptions again based on what I just experienced, and then engage in that transformative learning once more. So it repeats itself and it's constant growth. So we as teachers, as educators preparing pre-service teachers, can set up lessons, experiences, content that leads students to that point. And how can we do that? There's several different strategies to engage. And these are just questions we can ask ourselves as we set up a class, as we set up a program or a course, assignments. And it's just a very intentional approach to where we want to get our students in terms of learning, using, identifying their assumptions, and reconciling what they first believed to what they've experienced, either through an assignment or through some kind of field work or some kind of project-based learning. The other piece is then looking at our reflection mechanisms, things that we have in place in our course that will structure the activity, the reflection more so for the students and for us. And it involves how we assess the reflection, how we evaluate it. Are we going to provide prompts to help them? And then, if so, what kind of prompts? What kind of medium are we going to allow them? Is it going to be like a video that they can make and reflect, or multimedia presentations, or Word documents? So that has to be established for them and for us so that there's some continuity, consistency, and predictability for them. And then is anything going to be scaffolded for them to kind of move them toward the idea of critical self-reflection, what that means for them. So these are just some other mechanisms to put in place. So this is an example of how to put together an assignment using the strategies and the mechanisms I just mentioned. This is not like it says example assignment, but it's not a premier example. It's not perfect. It's just an idea of how to take those ideas and put them into practice. Um, so this is an assignment for students to review their what they've done in a course over 4 weeks to identify one assignment that they feel they learned the most from. And after they identify that assignment, then to write a short reflection, or they can record a 3-minute video. So there's 3 prompts for them to respond to. And one of the prompts is to get them to think about how that assignment connects to a learning outcome for the course. So if we go through this and we look at those strategies, those mechanisms, we can see that how those were used to shape this assignment. So in one of the strategies, it was about when and how often. So in this case, this is an end of course assignment. So it's just a one-time thing. And the other piece of those strategies was where this is going to happen. So it's a formal assignment and it's in an online course. So they'll be doing it at home. How much time is involved? They have 1 week to do the assignment. How much time it takes them to complete it within that week will vary, but for everybody, it's 1 week from the start of the week to when it's due. And then how will feedback occur? Feedback will be given to them. It's written feedback, and it is graded. And the grading is influenced by if and how the students respond to each question. And that is done through a rubric. So that's their assessment. So when we skip over to the reflection, the mechanisms in place, there are course learning outcomes involved because it's linked to one of the outcomes. The students have to make a connection between the assignment they chose and how it matches or aligns with one of the learning outcomes. So they have to make that connection. The scaffolding is there throughout the 4 weeks. So by the time they get to this one, they've already done some reflection, some critical reflection on content and how they're going to use content in their own profession, in their professional experience. So every week they get a question about how will you take this content from this week and apply it to your practice. So that kind of builds them to this point at the end of the course where they have to look back over all their assignments and then think about which one they learn the most from and how it connects to a learning outcome, and then how it changes their perception of themselves as a future education specialist. They can choose the medium, they can do a video, that's in the instructions, or they can do a Word document. So that's established for. Prompts are available for them that guides them to what I want them to do. And the criteria for this assignment is in the instructions and it's in the rubric, so they know how they're going to be assessed and what they're going to be assessed by. So you could see then how we take those reflection strategies and the reflection mechanisms and we take them to structure an assignment that will hopefully get the students to reflect critically and understand and identify ideas they had maybe 4 weeks ago to where they are at this point of the course at the end. And then to make that connection, understand how they changed, what their views are now, how they perceive themselves now, it's different from the beginning, or it could be the same. And then how all of that links to a particular learning outcome of the course. So this is an example of a rubric that was initially used for this assignment. I call it a non-example because it's very specific about those questions. And it basically says, if you answer those questions, then you've done the job. And that really doesn't get the students to think about how they're answering the questions or talking about how they see themselves now. So it's not really getting them to look inward and then to look at connections between where they were at the beginning of the course and where they are now. So revising that a little bit, including some of the words, the vocabulary like transformation, and asking them not so much that they answer each question, although that's part of it, but now it's about how detailed they are in answering those questions. And the specific is the assignment has prompted a major shift in the student's perception about themselves as an education specialist. So, okay, although they have to answer that question, but they have to answer it in a way that demonstrates that they thought about there being a shift. And there may not have been, but at least they're thinking about whether there was or wasn't. It's asking them to reflect back on who they were or how they saw themselves 4 weeks ago, and then how they see themselves now, and to perceive themselves as a special education teacher. So that's the difference between this one and the non-example. So to wrap up, these are just some suggestions for creating a reflective environment in the course. Some other suggestions, one, begin with the end in mind. Um, Reflection for reflection's sake, that's an equal, does not equal critical reflection. Meaning that oftentimes we just think we're having students reflect, and we're just giving them an assignment that says, reflect on your work over the past 4 weeks. And it's not really where we want to get them in terms of critical reflection or critical self-reflection. So these are just some things, questions to kind of keep in mind. And it all goes back to what do you want students to gain from the experience? And the experience could be a project-based learning assignment. It could be just a regular assignment. It could be a field work assignment. They're out in the field, the student teaching, they're working with students. So what is it we want them to get from that experience? And then what do you want to see change in your class with your students? But if we start thinking like that, then we can kind of begin to work backward from there and start asking them questions and giving them questions to think about as far as like what is it you're getting from this experience? And why do you think you're getting this from that experience? And what were your expectations going into this experience? And how did you see yourself in this moment, in this experience that surprised you? So questions like that, just to get them to understand and to build that foundation for when they actually get to an assignment or get to the point now where they have to really write out what's changed from then to now. So that's that scaffolding and that building block. So hopefully all of that will get them to the point or get us to the point where we have programs that based on definitions of terms like transformation and transformational and transformative learning, where we can write courses that align with university and department expectations delivered through vision and mission statements. So the last couple of slides are references. And I thank you for watching this. And if you have any feedback for me, please leave it or email it to me. My email is there. And again, thank you for taking the time to watch this.